So might face a little issue with the video, but it'll stay only for 5 minutes because the lens has accumulated fog. So it might take another 5 minutes for the video to become clear. But let's start and let's see. In the process, it'll get fixed. So today we are going to start a discussion with social issues and justice. If you know, social issues is part of your GS paper 1, and justice, social justice, is part of your GS paper 2. So if you look at the syllabus for your GS paper 1, you'll find, apart from Indian heritage and culture, history and geography, you find this word society mentioned here. In society, you have salient features of Indian society, wherein we'll discuss salient features like caste system, family, marriage, etc. Then another salient feature of Indian society is diversity in India. We see that we are a very diverse country in terms of language, religion. Then we'll move on to the role of women and women's organization, wherein we'll discuss how the role of women has been changing from traditional to modern period. The forces of globalization, modernization, how are they impacting the role of women, and whether the role of women or status of women has gotten better over time or not. Then we'll discuss population and related issues. Population explosion being one, the status of sex ratio in India being another, and we will discuss another few issues with respect to population. Then we'll move on to poverty and developmental issues. Now, if you look at this topic called poverty, you'll find it mentioned in paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3 as well. And also in discussion on ethics, integrity, and aptitude, we do have to address this issue. So poverty is something that you'll find permeates across paper boundaries. So what we'll do is we'll take up poverty for paper 1 and 2 together, because in paper 2 you'll find that you have poverty and hunger mentioned as well. So if you have already gone through the module breakup, you'll find that we will be covering poverty towards the end of social issues. And this is where we enter into the domain of social justice. Then urbanization and globalization, and what are their impacts on Indian society. Then we'll discuss social empowerment, the idea of social empowerment, the concept of social empowerment, and we'll try to apply this idea of social empowerment to our vulnerable sections, which is part of your paper 2 as well. Then communalism, regionalism, and secularism. So these are the topics that you find mentioned in paper 1. And then if you look at paper 2, apart from governance polity, you have social justice here, wherein we'll discuss various schemes, policies with respect to vulnerable sections of the society, vulnerable sections like social, like your scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, women, elderly, etc. Then these government policies that come up, we see that a lot of issues are there. Not every scheme is designed properly. Not every scheme is implemented properly. So what are the related issues, and how is it that we can make them better? Then we talk about the role of NGOs, self-help groups, and other institutions, because it is not just the role of state for the betterment of people, but we see that your various civil society and groups like non-governmental organizations, they also play an important role with respect to betterment of the society. Then vulnerable sections that we have already talked about. So what we have to do with respect to vulnerable sections is we have to understand what are the various issues that our vulnerable sections face, what are various government interventions that are there to fix those issues, and what can be the possible measures. With respect to vulnerable sections, please note that women and elderly, these two sections of the society, will be covered in your social issues part, with the social issues part, and I'll let you know when we cover these. And rest of them will be covered here. Then you have issues related to health, education, and human resources that we'll take up one by one, because these matters of social sectors and social services are becoming an issue, and the manifestation of which, particularly health, you found during your COVID lockdown and the period that followed. Then we have poverty and hunger mentioned here. So poverty, which will be covered with respect to paper 1 and 2, and then we'll move on to hunger, and that's where we enter into the domain of social justice. The video, I know a few of you are facing this problem because this is a problem on our end. Something has happened to the camera, so probably it'll get fixed in another few minutes. So please bear with us. Now, if you have already gone through the module breakup, in the first two modules will take up salient features of the Indian society and diversity of India, and this is the process in which we are going to cover rest of the topics as well. And here you find in your module 7 that we start with poverty, and post that we move into the domain of social justice, hunger, and so on. So just go through the syllabus, and please make sure that you have your main syllabus for both paper 1, 2 with you, and you keep highlighting the topics that have been covered. And it does not just apply to this paper, because if you look at other papers as well, this is a thing that you have to follow. Because as long as you do not have an in-depth understanding of the syllabus, you would not be able to relate various aspects. You would not be able to relate with current affairs. You would not be able to understand what is important from examination point of view and what is not. So with this, the first thing that we need to understand is what is the importance of these subjects for civil servants. Because if you look at the syllabus, be it your ethics, be it polity, governance, similarly social issues and justice, they have certain importance. Because once you become administrators, this is the society that you have to work in. You are expected to know the basics of the society and how the changes are being brought about. Because that is how you'll be able to target the vulnerable groups. You'll be able to implement policies, etc. So the importance for civil servants makes it clear that why you find this mentioned in the syllabus. Also, when we go through the syllabus, when we proceed with our preparation for the civil services, but particularly in the mains examination, you have to understand that the questions are applied in nature. Because if you look at questions, for instance, you'll find a question on work from home last year in paper 1. Now with COVID lockdown, this new concept of work from home started. It's not new, it was there, but it was used widely. Most of the organizations asked their employees to stay at home and work because there were restrictions on movement. There was this fear of spread of COVID, so people had to stay at home, but the work could not have stopped. So what was done was most of the organizations granted work from home to people wherever possible. Now with this change, with this work from home, you find that a few of the things in the society change. For example, you can think about the impact on environment. You can think about your carbon footprint. A lot of people going to work, taking their personal vehicles. Another thing is, if you talk about the financials of the organization itself, you see that the organizations have to spend less and less on lease. Then this concept of work from home brought about changes in family as well, in the structure of family, because you see that families became more egalitarian, etc. These are the themes that we are ultimately going to touch. But this is just to give you a glimpse that whatever social changes happen, whatever issues are there with respect to our vulnerable sections, UPSC tends to ask applied questions. So with respect to this subject, you have to understand that we'll be looking at everything in the light of change, in the light of social change, in the light of changes brought about by globalization, in the light of changes brought about by modernization. And also, whatever new changes come up, we have to keep our concepts sound, because you find that questions on cryptocurrency have been asked in paper one, even though we understand cryptocurrency primarily from economics point of view and also as a concept in science and technology. But you find that question was asked in paper one. So we have to be aware what are the trends with respect to our main question papers, the kind of questions that have been asked in the past, and the kind of questions that can be expected in the future. So conceptual clarity is something which is a must for this subject. So it would not matter so much if you do not have a lot of facts, but the concepts have to be sound, because these are the kind of questions. This is the part of the syllabus which is going to make a difference. Because think about it. If you talk about geography, you have more or less straightforward questions. And everyone has an equal footing with respect to those questions. So everyone is going to get those average marks. But these are the parts of the syllabus which are generally left untouched, because a lot of students feel that, okay, globalization is something that I know about and I can go on writing general answers. But if you understand that they tend to ask very specific questions, they tend to ask impact of these modernizing or rather social changing forces on various sections of the society, on various social groups, etc. So this is the part which is going to help you achieve above average scores. With that, if you look into the importance for students, you'll find that one, if you combine both social issues and justice, so you can expect close to 5 to 6 questions from social issues, and then on an average 3 to 4 questions from social justice. At times it has been as low as 2 questions as well, but you can generally expect 3 to 4 questions from social justice, which takes it up to more than 100 marks, which is equivalent to your other major subjects as well, which get a lot of attention from most of the students. But you have to remember that this is not something insignificant. This is something that carries more than 100 marks. Also, if you understand the society better, if you understand various issues related to various sections of the society, if you understand the kind of social changes that are happening, it is bound to help you with overall understanding. So your overall understanding of topics, your overall conceptual clarity keeps getting better with a better understanding of the subject. Then if you look at your essay paper, if you leave past 2 years, you'll find that there's at least one theme from Indian society which will be found in essay paper as well. So at least one essay, one topic will be there on which you need to have a good understanding of Indian society and social issues. So if we talk about importance for you, you can consider it in terms of close to 125 marks for an essay. It is not necessary that you'll find an essay, but yes, there are chances, and more often than not, questions are being asked in essay as well. Then you have 100 plus marks, including social issues and justice. And you can look at the trends of questions that have been asked in the past. So every year, you can see 6 questions, and at times you have 5 questions that have been asked from this part as well. Now, with respect to how we are going to understand syllabus, etc., the first thing that I would want you to know is your class notes and PPTs. The notes that you're going to prepare, the annotated PPTs that you have will be sufficient for your general understanding. Along with it, whatever frequently asked questions are there will be taken care of with in your additional reading material that is being provided. Now, as far as books are concerned, you have to take up sociology NCRTs for class 12. I have provided the link here in the PPT. And anyways, you can go on the internet and search. For class 12 NCRT of sociology, you have 2 NCRTs. One talks about the basic understanding of Indian society, and the other one is directed more towards changes in Indian society. So these are 2 themes from a class 12, standard 12 NCRTs that cover pretty much all the parts of the syllabus. Apart from that, your PPTs will be sufficient. Plus, you have to know that your current affairs, and particularly from social justice point of view, are very important. Because if we talk about government schemes and intervention, you see that there are a lot of schemes coming up. Then there'll be analysis in the news with respect to their design implementation. Then you'll find there'll be issues related to health. There'll be issues related to, say, primary education that you'll find in the newspaper, the new education policy, etc. Those are the things which have to be covered from current affairs, and you have to keep updating your notes. So make sure that you leave out spaces in your notes and keep adding these things there. Also, take for instance your population data. I find that there has been a discussion going on around census 21, that when to start, what will be the factors, etc. So these are the issues that you'll find in the news. Also, various schemes related to vulnerable sections. Again, whatever social changes are happening. So as and when, you might not be able to understand right now what I mean when I say that you have to take up things from current affairs. But as and when we proceed with the syllabus, I'll keep telling you that what can be done, etc. Now, if you look at the way in which we are going to proceed with syllabus, what we have to do is, the first thing is that we have to understand the background of Indian society. We have to look at various social institutions. Various social institutions, in the sense, you have the caste system, then the institution of family, marriage, etc. Also, what we have to do is we have to understand that traditionally, what has been the role of various sections. For instance, if we talk about family, there are a few functions related to family that have been there. Now, with forces of change, take for instance, shift of the Indian society from joint families to nuclear families, which is a change brought in about by industrialization, modernization, and globalization. So the functions of family change as well. Now, with this change, you'll find that any change can be positive or negative for that matter. So when we understand social institutions, we have to look at them in the light of change. That what are the factors which are bringing about that change? What are the changes that are being brought about? And whether these changes are positive or negative, because they tend to ask direct questions from there. And if you look in the past year previous year questions, you'll find that direct questions have been asked from there. So we have to understand this change. We have to look at everything in the light of change and think about the negative and positive consequences. Then how to fix these issues? Now, when I say that, say, globalization has brought about negative changes in the society. For instance, globalization has improved the status of women in society, has improved their status of health, has improved the status of education. But with that, there are a few issues. For instance, dual burden of responsibilities on women. That now they have to take care of household responsibilities along with their extra-familial responsibilities of their remunerative employment. So these are the negative issues. These are the associated issues that we'll find. And finally, we'll look into how can we go about fixing these issues. So what we're doing is we are going to look at various sections of the society, various social institutions in the Indian society, try to understand the background, then look at them in the light of change. That what are the factors of change? What are the kind of changes that are being brought about? and what are the associated issues. And then finally, how to fix those issues. This is going to be the process. Now, if I say that, if you look at the syllabus, you say that you find salient features of Indian society. Now, we understand a lot about Indian society. The syllabus talks about women. We know a few issues related to women. We know about globalization, poverty. So, is this general understanding that we have enough? Now, if you look at the questions, you'll find that one, that your general understanding is not enough. And also, you'll find that whatever general understanding you have is not correct from sociological point of view. It need not always be wrong, but it is generally partial in nature. By partial, I mean, one, it is incomplete. Another thing is that everyone, on the basis of their socio-economic background, you'll find will have biases. You'll have biases towards your community. You'll have biases towards your religion. So whatever social background you come from, you'll carry that bias. And when it comes to sociology, because it is a subset of sociology, the thing is that you have to get out of the bubble, come out of the bubble, and look at everything neutrally. Now, yes, I understand that being completely impartial is something that is not practically achievable, but we do have to try and move in that direction, so that when we look at any issue, we look at it in a holistic manner. Holistic in the sense, we have to look at it from multiple dimensions, and also we have to cater to all the perspectives that are there. But rather than getting into the depth of sociology, what we are going to do is we'll use the same sociological norms, same rules, same methodology, and go about these changes. With respect to the video, you can see that it is getting slightly better with time, because the camera is getting heated up and it is defogging the lens. So just there for another couple of minutes, and I hope it will be fine. So we have to understand that our general understanding of topics and various issues is not going to be sufficient. We have to understand things, for instance, in a complete manner, in an impartial manner. One, and another thing is that they tend to ask specific questions. So when they ask specific questions, we have to write specific answers. And this is the subject that is ultimately going to give you advantage if your concepts are sound, if your concepts are in place. Now, the process in which you have to study is you attend the lectures, you understand the concepts. Post that, you revise using your PPTs and related PPTs and your standard book. So you have another book that we have provided you. Take that book up as well during revision, because there are few issues, social issues particularly, that have been covered there, which will help you make your notes better. So what we have to do is we have to understand the concepts during the class. Try to jot down your notes during the class itself. You find the PPT in a very synoptic manner, in the way in which you prepare your notes. But what you have to do is, while going through the class, just try to write examples, etc., in your notes. The reason is you might forget a few examples that I've given in the class. So it's better you take your rough notes right now and prepare your final notes during revision. And you can follow the same process of the PPT, but do remember to leave space either on the right hand side of your notes, left hand side of your notes, or gutter, so that whatever examples come up in the news, you can keep adding those examples there. Whatever new concepts you find, you can keep mentioning them there, so that your notes are complete. And before your mains examination, you can keep going through these notes and keep making them better. Now, along with it, what we have to do is we have to look into previous year questions. So what is the ultimate litmus test of whatever you have understood? So if you go through a concept of poverty, go through the concept of poverty to understand whether you are going in the right direction or not, your previous year questions are going to help. So you have to understand, look into your previous year questions and try to understand whether you are in a position to answer these or not. Along with it, you have to be writing daily. You have to write daily, because writing is something, answer writing is something that you cannot possibly improve within a week or two. It is a process which takes time. So it's better to start early. So now, whenever we have a class, we'll try to give you a question. We'll try to give you a question in each and every class, be it previous year question or be it a practice question. What you have to do is you just have to write the question and send it across to IS Live, so that it gets evaluated and you keep getting your comments on a regular basis. And by the time you finish this subject, your writing practice for at least this subject would be in place. So this is the process. We have talked about the study material that we have to use. Now we have to start with basic understanding of society. Another thing is, once we're done with the basics of society, I would want you to engage with me when we look into various issues, so that you also storm your brain while sitting in the class. It's not going to be a one-way communication. We are going to engage in a conversation together. So if we talk about society, just understand it as that you have various individuals living in any society for that matter. Then you have social groups as well. You have groups of people. For instance, this is a group of people, this is a group of people, which comprises of multiple individuals. Now, to understand society, you can understand it as this group of people and the interactions between them. Society is not just a group of people. It is this complex web of social relationships. The way people interact with each other, the way social groups interact with each other. For instance, you'll find on the basis of differences, people having conflict or social groups having conflict among each other. That is at times found in communal violence. Similarly, you'll find that there is a particular relationship between social groups on the basis of their sex. So the way social groups of women and men interact. So when you understand society, you have to understand that it is not just this sum total of people or individuals in the society. It is this complex web of relationship between people and between social groups as well. Then we talk about a group of people. If you talk about, say, a particular society, it is a group of people who share a common culture. They experience a common culture. They live in a particular area, and they have that sense of belonging, and they have that sense of connectedness with each other. This is what society means. And you have to remember this definition? No. This is just to give you a brief idea about what do we mean when we say, when we coin the term society. If you look at a few features of society, you'll find that these groups of people and the interactions between them have a few features. For instance, people have various similarities and differences as well. And on basis of these similarities and differences, you'll find conflict and cooperation in society. You can find cooperation in the sense that we belong to one nation, we contribute to the same economy. In terms of conflict, you have another example of discrimination against a few social groups, discrimination against women, various other conflicts with respect to communal violence, etc. So society has both likeness and differences. And on basis of these likeness and differences, you find cooperation and conflict in society. That society is an abstract concept because you find that it is not something you can touch. You cannot touch society. Yes, you can touch individuals. They are present as physical entities, but this web of relationship that we're talking about, the way they interact with each other, is something abstract. Also, the society is a process and not a product. What do we mean? That we see that with various forces, be it an individual or be it any other force that will come to, you find that there are continuous changes going on in the society. This web of relationships goes on changing between people. So it is society. If we say Indian society, you see that from traditional to modern times, you find a lot of changes happening over a period of time. So we cannot say that Indian society, we cannot look at it as a final product. It is a process. It has been in the process, and it is going to remain in the process. Now, society provides a system of social stratification. Now, social stratification is something that will take up with class, but to give a simpler idea about this, you find on the basis of wealth, prestige, the society accords status to everyone in the society. So on the basis of, say, caste system, on the basis of your caste, the society is arranged in a hierarchical manner. What is that stratification? On the basis of your wealth, we are one divided in classes, but also on the basis of that wealth, on the basis of our class, society tends to arrange people and rather groups of people in a hierarchical manner, which is called stratification, social stratification. And we see it is not just caste system in the Indian society; it can be other systems. So every society has a way of stratifying, a way of social stratification. So for instance, if we move from traditional Indian society to modern Indian society, now we see at least in the urban areas, your identity related to caste does not matter that much, at least in the urban areas, and that we are going to get into the finer details of it later in the class. And we see that your class has started to become more important. Similarly, there are other Western societies which have been stratifying on the basis of class. So every society has a system of stratification. Now, interdependence between people, cooperation between people is another essential feature of a society, because it is this interdependence, it is this cooperation that holds them together. Otherwise, societies fall apart. So if you see that if the level of conflict exceeds the level of cooperation and interdependence, societies fall apart. And you can take examples from various violent conflicts. That once that threshold of cooperation is crossed, the conflicts take over, and ultimately the society falls apart. The society has certain norms of conduct. For instance, you can find it in various social institutions. You can find various different norms. You can also find them in your political ideas. So ultimately, your constitution is a reflection of society, is a reflection of what the society believes in. And on the basis of whatever changes are happening in this understanding of society, the constitution gets amended. Right? So there are few things which had been prevailing in the Indian society, which were accepted by the society. But as more and more number of people start going against that idea, you see that political changes are brought about. So for instance, the abolition of sati. For instance, abolition of untouchability. So you always have to remember, now from here I would want to make a point that you see that all these social your policy framework or your policies or political changes do not necessarily bring about social change. So this is a statement that I'm going to repeat for the session, that you have to remember that political changes need not necessarily bring about social change. This is something you have to remember, because for instance, dowry has been banned, but you still find it prevalent in Indian society. Untouchability has been abolished by the Indian constitution, but you still find it prevalent in the society. So it is not that when you come up with suggestions, you do not always have to say that yes, bring about policy level changes. The government has to intervene. Yes, government intervention is important, that makes changes, but it is not the only answer. And at times you find that the bottom-up approach of making or bringing about changes in the society before making political changes goes a long way. So this is something that we'll go on discussing as we move through the syllabus, as we proceed with the syllabus. Now when we talk about society, we say that society goes on changing. There's always changes happening in the society. Now these changes can be internal or external. Internal in the sense, forces from within the society bringing about change. External means some external factors or external social groups or external ideas bringing about change in the society. Now, can you suggest what can be the possible, can you give instances of internal factors that have brought about changes in the Indian society? Can you suggest instances or examples, rather examples of internal factors that bring about changes in society? NGOs, pressure groups, perfect. Education, social reform movements, great. Education, awareness, etc. Lovely, you are getting to the point. So you have internal factors, say for instance, various socio-religious reform movements that you saw in modern history. Then you can have various external factors that bring about this change. Can you suggest these external factors? What can be these external factors? Globalization, yes. Climate change, perfect. The advent of Britishers in India, great. Then you can talk in terms of religion. You can talk about changes brought about by the advent of Islam and Christianity in India. So you can think about external and internal factors which affect society, which make changes to the society. Again, technology that you're asking, technology can be both internal and external. So yes, the ideas that you have about social change, they're right in place. Now this social change is the norm. Social change is something that goes on happening. Then if we talk about social changes, you see that in various dimensions you'll find that changes happen. Now think about demography that changes over a period of time. Demography you can understand in terms of both size and composition or distribution, that we're going to ultimately discuss with population and related issues. So the size of population has been changing. It has been growing tremendously in India, for instance. The composition, the ideas, the concepts that give you an idea about composition, take example of sex ratio. These are the demographic changes that go on happening. Then we talk about social-cultural changes. You can talk about the impact of various foreign religions on the country. You can talk about the impact of globalization on the country. So these are a few social changes that happen. Then we talk about economic changes. Think about the idea of liberalization and privatization, which has brought about social change in the country. Then political, we can talk about the moment we adopted our constitution. We can talk about various political ideas that traveled all the way across from Europe. So the idea of liberty, fraternity, equality. These can be agents of social change, political agents of social change. Then the technological revolution. Since the industrial revolution, we have seen that how technology has been playing a tremendously important role in bringing about social changes. So you have various examples of that as well. And also, along with your other social-cultural changes, education is one. So it changes in education. If you talk about education, back in the old days, education had a component of religion. But rather, education was based on religion. And the more we advance towards our post-industrial world, we see it is getting secularized. There has been a secularization of education. So these are a few agents or factors that bring about social changes in the society. And also with this, you have to understand that whenever we look at any change, we have to look at all the dimensions. So talking about social cultural change, again, you can think about change from traditional Indian society to modern Indian society. Or if we talk about other social-cultural change, the impact of modernization or westernization on Indians. For instance, the clothes that we wear today, the food that we eat today. What are these? These are social-cultural factors of bringing about social change. Then you can think about economic factors in terms of globalization, privatization, liberalization. They've brought about various changes. Then you can think about disasters. Right? We can talk about the changes that are brought about by disasters as well. So they'll bring in a lot of changes. And now again, the thing is, if you take up any of the factors, any of the incidents, it is going to impact all the dimensions. Take for example globalization. Now globalization has changed the way our economies function. Globalization has changed the way that we speak to each other. It has changed our language of communication. Globalization has changed the way we behave with people. Globalization has brought about political changes in the country, the advent of MNCs, and the dilution of state sovereignty. And these are a few things that we'll discuss with globalization. So think about globalization, which has brought about technological changes in the country, which has changed our education system as well. So all these factors you'll find that they have multidimensional impact on the Indian society. So remember, when you look at social change, always consider these dimensions. So I hope you got the answer to your question. Now also, what we have to look into is the relationship between society and the individual. Now it is a role where you'll find that society brings about changes in the individual and vice versa. That means that individuals also bring about social change. You can take examples of your social religious reformers. You can take examples of say Mahatma Gandhi, B.R. Ambedkar. Now these were the individuals who had a tremendous impact on the society. Also, we say that society impacts individual. Society shapes our ideas. Society makes us learn about language, makes us learn about our culture. Society is what gives us education, changes our viewpoint. So society has an impact on individual, and individual impacts society as well. Now with this, you have to understand socialization. Socialization is something wherein you see that the way society shapes an individual. So socialization is the process of learning basic rules, habits, norms of the society. Now generally the socialization will happen in your particular social group. For instance, once a baby is born, who makes the baby learn language? Who makes the baby learn about their various cultural practices? Who makes the baby know about various practices related to their religion? You see that family is the first factor, primary factor for that. Then the child starts going to the school. Then school becomes, or rather your education system becomes an important factor of socialization, where you learn various habits. Wash your hands before you eat, for instance. That you have your peer group, that you have your friends who have an impact on you. You also get socialized there. Then you move on to college. Then you move on to some other city. If you move from a rural to an urban area, then you learn various norms with respect to urban society. You understand their culture, and which brings about changes in your cultural experience as well. So this idea of socialization, yes, they're not going to ask you a direct question on what is socialization, but you have to understand that every individual has certain impact of society on them. Now again, it is always varied. Some will have more impact of education than family. Some will have more impact of religion than family. So it is always different. But what you have to remember is there are various factors of socialization which bring about change in an individual, because that's where our ideas come from. And this is the reason where I was saying that our views are bound to be partial. The reason is socialization. Because of this socialization, we'll not be able to look at them impartially or in an unbiased manner. And also the limited scope with which we function, there's no way that we can have a complete understanding of any topic for that matter. So yes, family, friends, society, mother, parents, family, schools. So we can talk about the relationship between individual and society. Now with this, we'll start our discussion on various topics that are there in your syllabus. Now this is the last topic, which is going to give you understanding. Post that, you have everything mentioned in your syllabus. Now question is, can relationship between individual and society, I can write sensitization. Yes, you can write. See, yes, it obviously impacts, but you have to see that when we're talking about socialization, it is different. Sensitization is different. Yes, we'll definitely come to sensitization, or there might be a chance that I'm not able to understand your question completely. So maybe you can rephrase your question. And I hope you're not confusing sensitization with socialization. Okay, so if we talk about various forces of change, various factors of change, what you'll find is modernization, westernization, industrialization, globalization, and urbanization. These are a few themes that you have to touch when we talk about the factors of change. Yes, the relationship between society and the individual can be negative as well. So society can shape your ideas negatively. Society can turn an individual who is a mere believer in religion to a fundamentalist. So society can have both type of impact. So again, when we talk about any change or any impact, it can be both positive and negative. So that is something that we have mentioned at the beginning. So you have to remember that it is always going to be both ways. But what we have to do is, rather than say vouching for one side, we have to look at things neutrally, and we have to understand that an individual gets their ideas, the changes that happen in an individual are shaped by the society, and which can be both negative and positive. So now when we talk about various factors of change, these are going to be a few important themes. And in the light of these themes, you would have to see that what kind of changes are happening in the society. Now starting with modernization. Now yes, we'll touch these themes on varied levels in our discussion. But one thing that you have to understand is modernization. So because we're going to look at our entire syllabus in the light of tradition and modernity, in the light of continuity and change. That for instance, there is a social institution that was there. Talk about caste system. Is a social institution that has been there traditionally in the Indian society. But with the forces of modernization, changes are coming. The changes are being made in that social institution. So if we look at caste system today, there are few elements which have continued from the past, and there are other few which have changed with the forces of modernization. So we have to look at everything in the light of change. And again, you do not have to always take an outright stand whether something has changed completely or not. You have to be balanced, because you'll always find elements of continuity even in some things that you term completely modernized. So now starting with modernization, what is your idea of modern? What according to you modern means? Can someone give instances? What is your idea of modernization? What is your idea of modern? Is wearing jeans, shirts, is this modern? Being rational, being liberal, something new, Interesting. The internet, again, idea of modernization. Okay. Social change, people being aware of their rights. Technology, culture, modern culture, use of technology, again, something new. This is interesting, yes, the way of looking at it. Now, if you see why we are doing this exercise is so that one, whatever general ideas you have, because when we say partial, that does not necessarily mean that whatever idea you have of things is wrong. The thing is, it can be right up to a certain extent. So that's why we are going to engage in this brainstorming exercise. So egalitarianism, that's great. Self-awareness, smart way of thinking, good. So what we're going to do is, we'll first ask you what is your idea, and then we'll move on to discuss how to structure it. Because the most important thing with your entire civil service preparation and social issues, society and justice in general, in particular, is that you have to know how to do it, rather than just understanding. Because you can just read from a book and understand as well, but you have to know that how to structure your thoughts, how to conceptualize the question. Because the moment you see a question, you should be in a position to understand what are the various dimensions that have been asked in this question, what is the exact precise demand of this question, and how, or rather in what manner am I going to proceed. So that is something that we'll keep going through. Now let's look at a few aspects of modernity. Now, one, the biggest change that you find with respect to modern Indian society is, or rather difference between traditional and the modern society is, because we're not talking specifically in terms of Indian society, but yes, we'll be using more examples from Indian society than say the Western society. So one important change that has happened from say medieval times or ancient times to modern times is that the role of religion, the importance of religion has been going down. The importance of religion has been going down. Otherwise, you find that be it your political affairs, be it your education, be it your social structure, religion was the most significant force back in the days. So with modernization, what has happened is there has been secularization, secularization of education, secularization of society, secularization of our politics. Because you can remember examples of various kings who derived their power straight from religion. They assumed the position of messenger of God. And also, something that you would have read in your Indian polity and constitution as well, the idea of secularism, wherein the Western concept talks about the idea of separation of state and church. And why did that come in picture? Because of the overarching powers of the church or religion. So with modernization, one aspect of modernity is that there has been secularization of Indian society. Then if we talk about rationalization, that means that rather than going with the established norms, we use reasoning, we use rationale to think about. So we more and more use rational ideas for that matter. The idea of equality, the idea of egalitarianism. What are these ideas? Rational ideas. So coming out of your superstitions and thinking rationally is called rationalization, which is again something given by modernization. Increasing influence of science and technology, and that you can see that the way science and technology has shaped the modern world. Now, science and technology is one of the most important or significant forces of change today. Not just in the past, not just because of your industrial revolution, but till today. You see that science and technology is behind the spread of globalization across the globe. Because globalization would not have happened at this pace, would not have penetrated so deep in societies if not for science and technology, if not for technological advancement, if not for advancement in communication technology. Then also the idea of or the concept of emergence of nation state is again linked to modernity. You see that in the past you find various kingdoms rather than nations. You find various kingdoms, empires, which were formed. Well, the idea was imperialism behind it. With time, and particularly after the First World War, you find that there has been a rise in the sense of nationalism, in the idea of nationalism. There has been a rise of nation states. So people, on the basis of cultural similarities and differences, created nations, various nations that are termed as nation states. So the emergence of nation states and the idea of democracy. Because if you look at the origin of state, various ideas regarding origin of state, you find that before it actually turned into democracy, the idea was that the state has a divine origin. The state is not something created by humans, not something created by us, but it has been given to us by God, by religion. So from that, we started moving towards the idea of democracy, that it is something which has been created by us, it is something that is meant for us, it is something that has to be, in which we have to bring about changes ourselves. And that's where you land in the idea of democracy, that we are the ones who are going to elect our representatives. There's no one who claims power from the or authority from religion or authority because they belong to a certain family. They have to be removed. And we are the ones, we as people of this country are the ones who are going to decide how we run our affairs, how we take care of our day-to-day social and political affairs. So this idea of democracy is also associated with modernization. Then industrialization, capitalism, and commodification. Now, one thing is that obviously generally most of us relate modernization to industrialization. One that you can understand. So with time we see post our first industrial revolution, first phase of industrial revolution, that more and more changes were brought about. So rather than things being because initially we are talking about religion or church being very powerful, then their monopoly is broken by state over a period of time. Now this state is being challenged by individuals or rather society. That the state cannot do whatever they want. We also should have a say in the matters of state. Along with it came the idea of capitalism, which talks about market-oriented approach, which talks about the role of market in deciding what happens to the prices of commodities, for instance. It is just one aspect of it, because capitalism in itself is a big concept which cannot be possibly taken up here. And this is something that we have already discussed in your world history lectures. So this idea of capitalism, the idea of market-oriented approach, is also linked to modernization. Also, when we talk about commodification, because commodity you can think in terms of any object. Now, commodification here means with modernization is that now we put a price tag on everything. Now we put a price tag on everything. Now everything is being treated as commodity, be it humans, be it animals, be it anything. So we see that the terms, because now with the concept, with the persuading concept of class, we find that your financial being, or rather your wealth, matters more and more. If you want good education, you need to have money. If you want better healthcare, you need to have money, so on and so forth. And we see that this role of money has been increasing in our society with time, which can be owed to the idea of capitalism, industrialization. But with that, what has happened is now everything has a price tag. So you want to say get away with the responsibility of standing in queues, you can just pay your way through. Then the idea or the process of urbanization. Now, what has happened, because urbanization and industrialization go hand in hand. Now, if you look at pre-industrial society, it was agrarian in nature. Agriculture was the most important activity, was the most important in the future, we see that people started moving from rural areas to urban centers where the industries were set up, which is basically the process of urbanization. The process of urbanization is the growth of urban areas, is the growth of population in urban areas, is the migration of people from rural to urban areas. So urbanization, one of the factors, the most important factors of triggering urbanization, the process of urbanization is what? Industrialization. The expansion of mass media. Now, within a matter of minutes, with the base of science and technology, and rather information and communication technology, you see in a matter of minutes, you get the news of what is happening across the globe. And not just this, not just in the sense of information, but the role of mass media in socializing. The role of mass media has been changing. It has been influencing us, has become the major force behind our socialization, has become the major force behind the ideologies, the ideas that we carry. Now, the basic difference between industrialization and urbanization is industrialization is the setting up of industries, manufacturing plants, that is basically moving from rural or agrarian economy to industrial economy. And urbanization is the process of growth of population in urban areas. Now, urbanization is something that we are going to discuss in detail because it is there in your third module. It is a part of your syllabus that we are going to, because urbanization, simply understood, is the growth of cities or the growth of population in urban areas. But otherwise, it has impact on each and every dimension of your life, which we are going to cover. So we have to understand things simply right now because these things will come. You will not worry about it. Just follow the process. So these are the various aspects of modernity that we talk about. Again, with modernity, you can talk about the various changes that have been brought about in societies, the various cultural changes, the various social changes, the various political changes. Now, this force of modernization, what we're going to do now is to prepare ourselves for our future discussion, to prepare ourselves for the actual topics that have been mentioned in the syllabus. What we're going to do is we'll look at the changes in Indian society in the light of these forces of modernization. Here, we'll just get a basic idea because most of these ideas are going to be covered in the topics that are coming. So, what we're going to do is we'll talk about religion and the changes with respect to modernization. Can modernity be attributed as a reason as to why caste system has somewhat faded in the urban areas and classes come more into forefront of the society? Yes, absolutely. And this is something we're going to discuss in detail. The transition of caste system towards class system. That is something that we're going to discuss. And also, when we say that there are differences in caste and class, but we find that there are a lot of similarities in terms of their features and their content that we're going to discuss in the future. Now, let's talk about how the concept of religion has changed from traditional Indian society to modern Indian society. Because that's where we start with Indian society. Because we're going to look at various features of Indian society. For instance, we're going to talk about caste system, which is a system of stratification. We're going to talk about the social institutions of family and marriage. We're going to talk about religion in terms of communalism and secularism. Then diversity is one other topic that we have to take up. Along with it, we'll talk about various factors which are bringing about changes in these features of the Indian society. So these features, I've mentioned a few features here. Let's have a brief idea about them and then take up diversity, family and marriage, and this idea of social stratification in detail in the later lectures. So if we talk about religion, as we have said in the process of modernization, that the importance of religion in the traditional Indian society was high. It was one of the most significant forces. Look at our social makeup. Look at the social institution of, say, family, social institution of caste system. They were all derived from religion. But with modernization, we see that the importance to religion, the importance being attached to religion is going down. So we not find a lot of religious education going on, etc. And also what you have to understand is, when we talk about changes, so for instance, there is this force of modernization, which we're saying that is bringing down the significance of religion. But at the same time, because of these modernizing forces, religion is founding a new fervor in the country as well, in the form of backlash against these forces of modernization, these forces of secularization. So always, whenever there is going to be a change in the society, it is going to be followed by movement in the opposite direction. For instance, if we talk about the impact of modernity in terms of our language, so our language, more and more of us are using English as the means of communication now. But as a backlash against this homogenizing force or this language, universal language, we find that our various linguistic people from various linguistic backgrounds are asserting their identity. Think about the policy level changes that go in the opposite direction. So one thing is modernization, and rather this is the concept of westernization, because the basic difference between modernization and westernization is that the idea of modernization is generally linked to westernization, because we see that with modernization, industrialization is happening. With modernization, cultural changes are happening. But at the same time, if we see, it is because of the Western countries that most of the changes are towards westernization. For instance, why not some other language but English? Western concept. So this westernization, and this is how you have to differentiate between them. Now this language, English, which is a homogenizing force in a way, you find that there is a backlash against this homogenizing force in the form of various linguistic groups asserting their identity. So there's always is going to be, if not equal, but opposite reaction. It is not going to be equal, but it will always be opposite reaction. Reaction against various cultural ideas from the West. Reaction against, say, celebration of Valentine's Day. Reaction against celebration of Halloween. What are these ideas? This is basically a backlash against westernization of Indian culture. So when we talk about these, you always have to look into the opposite idea as well. That yes, modernization is bringing about secularization of the society, but at the same time, in the form of backlash against this modernization, we find new grown fervor towards communalism. So I hope you are able to understand what I mean. So you always look at the opposite reaction as well. So in traditional Indian society, religion all pervasive, but with the forces of modernization, the significance or the importance of religion is going down. Then if we talk about diversity, now you tell me, what do you think about diversity? What has happened to diversity with the forces of modernization? Are we more diverse now? Or this force of modernization has been homogenizing? What do you think? A few of you are saying that diversity has increased. A few of you are saying no, it has gone down. Can you come up with the reasons? Why do you think that diversity has gone down? Or why do you think that diversity is increasing with modernization? Yes, come up with a reason. Why do you think diversity is increasing? Okay, so the ones who are in favor of saying that the diversity is decreasing are talking about homogenizing forces like our language, like the global culture that we live, that we experience now. Yes, there has been homogenization. Okay, so most of you are vouching about homogenization. Now, diversity can also be understood. The increase in diversity. Yes, someone has finally come up with an example of diversity in the form of gender identity, LGBTQ community. They're talking about. Great. Similarly, you can talk about other aspects of diversity. Diversity of food. It was not available in the past, right? The continental food, the Italian food, the Chinese food, the Korean food that you eat today was not available in the past. So yes, there is a diversity on your plate. Then you can talk about the influence of various religions. Don't you think the religious diversity compared to the traditional Indian society is more now? Yes, it is. Then you talk about various cultures. Talk about people from various linguistic backgrounds. So, in a way, diversity has increased, but it has gone down in the sense that people with varied linguistic backgrounds, varied cultural backgrounds in our country, we are losing the diversity because of this homogenizing forces of homogenizing force of modernization. So I hope you understand because it works out both way. We cannot conclusively say that whether diversity has increased or not. So what we have to do is we have to look at it from both the ends and come up with a balanced perspective. Okay, so yeah, dressing sense, yes. So dressing sense is again an example of homogenization and also an example of increase in diversity as well. Because now you see that various dresses from different cultures become popular. You can think about say the kind of intermingling that happens between cultures. So Indo-Western dresses, right? Indo-Persian dresses. These are the things that are happening. So that is, do not worry about that. The changes in culture, how cultural, what is happening to the cultural diversity, etc., is something that we'll take up with our lecture on globalization. Okay, so diversity, yes. Then we talk about family and marriage. Now, what are the changes that are happening in the institution of family? Let's talk about family first. Can you suggest something? Suggest some changes happening in the institution of family. Nuclear families joined to nuclear, good. Other ideas? Divorce again, it is related to marriage. Okay, let's take for the institution of family and marriage together. So divorce is one. Now marriage has become a contractual affair. It is not something that has to be carried on for generations. Then endogamy is declining. Intercaste marriages, okay, great. Women have more rights in the family. The families are becoming egalitarian, good. Decline or of patriarchy, okay, patriarchy. So the decline in patriarchy, yes. The families are becoming more egalitarian now. The husband and the wife in the family have a little more, say, egalitarian relationship. Abolition of sati is another example. It is say a social evil attached to our institution of marriage. Homosexual marriages, great. The idea of live-in relationship, for instance, right? So yes, we can talk about the changes that have been brought about to this institution of family. Now, when we discuss family, we're going to look at the functions of family, how there have been changes in the function of family, how there have been changes in the composition of family, how there have been changes in the size of family. All those aspects will be taken care of in detail there. Now, if we talk about stratification, so this is you can think in terms of the way we stratified our society, the way social stratification was prevalent in our society in the past, which you can generally say was in the form of varna and then later the caste system. But now, if you see that the stratification is more on the basis of class, right? So the idea of stratification is also changing. Yes, we'll discuss stratification and caste system in detail. So this is an aspect that maybe you can, if you're not able to understand, you can leave out for a while. Then our values. What do you think is happening to our values? Can you comment on a few? Can you mention a few traditional Indian values? Traditional values in the Indian system. Let's look at a few values first. Rather than saying going down, let's look at the values first. Respect to our elders, tolerance, great. Honesty, unity, etc. So we're mentioning a few values. Now, if we talk about values, there are few values that have changed, and that is very evident in the society. Now, we do not treat our elders the way we used to treat in the past. We do not treat our parents the way we used to treat them in the past. Right? So there can be a few values, but here you have to remember one thing. Now, when it comes to positive values, when it comes to positive values in the Indian society, you have to remember that if a question is asked, you have to try to keep your answer a little biased towards the positive aspect. I'll give you an example. Now, back in 2017, the whole tolerance debate was going on. Whether India is tolerant or whether India is not tolerant anymore. What have been the changes? So is it becoming, say majoritarian, etc.? So the whole debate around tolerance was going on. Now, it is again a very important social issue because it is a direct question on our value system. But the way UPSC asked the question was, rather than getting into the whole tolerance debate, they asked the question saying that what do you think love and tolerance, that love and tolerance have been an important feature of Indian society in the past and are in the present as well. So the question was, love and tolerance have not been have not just been important feature of the Indian system in the past, but are an important feature now as well in modern times as well. So this is the way in which a negative concept is being turned, a negative incident is being turned into a positive question by UPSC. So you have to look at things in a positive light, and that's something that would have been told or already suggested by different teachers, that you have to keep your answers balanced. One, second, you always end with way forward. Then we talk about a political system. There has been change. We can see there has been a definite change in the traditional Indian society. It was modern. It was a system of monarchy, and from there we have moved towards a system of democracy. Then there are other political features as well that we'll come to. Now, someone's asking that how this question is positive. The question on love and tolerance. So they are saying that love and tolerance has been there in the Indian society in the past, and it is also there in the present. Discuss. So they haven't asked your opinion on that, and even if they would have asked your opinion on this, you should have gone with the statement. Should have gone for the statement because that is what is expected of you. Now, so not just political system. As we see that our political system has changed, but our political values are changing as well. Then, if you look at our economic system, there also you can see that not just traditional economic system, but you can also find out the changes that have been happening over a period of time. So traditionally, how our economic system was, maybe you can say start from barter. Then if you talk about the major economic activity, it was agriculture. Then we moved towards industrial economy, and slowly we are transforming into a post-industrial economy, which is more inclined towards service sector. So this is basically various features of Indian society that you can look at in the light of change, in the light of modernity and tradition. Now, why did we do this exercise? Because when we come to the topics that are mentioned in the syllabus, basically various social institutions, role of women, we have to look at it in the light of change. Because you have to understand the transition, because that is how you can come up with what are the challenges and you can suggest solutions for the same. Now, with this, if a question is asked, is contemporary Indian society modern or traditional? With this understanding that these are the various features of Indian system, of the Indian society. Now, basis that, what can we say? Is the Indian society modern or traditional? Now, this question has been asked primarily because you have to understand whenever they say that, okay, talk about the changes that have happened to a particular institution. Talk about the changes, for instance, that globalization has brought about in women. Now, what you have to do always is you break it down in various features. If I say that what are the changes in the caste system, what changes have been brought about by modernization in the caste system? So to figure that out, rather than thinking generally that okay, now intercaste marriages can happen, for instance, now untouchability has been abolished by the constitution. Rather than thinking generally, what you have to do is to think about these changes, break it down in the features of that institution, and then look at it one by one, and make a habit of this practice. So if you talk about, say, globalization and the impact of globalization on women, you talk about various dimensions of women's life. You talk about how the traditional role has changed to a modern role. You talk about how the status in society has changed, how various socio-economic factors attached to the status have changed. So this is a practice that we are going to follow. And you have to always break it down in various dimensions and features to understand the change properly. Now, what you have to do is, while going through, while revising, just think about this question, because this is exactly what we have done here. So to understand whether Indian society is modern or traditional, we talked about various aspects of Indian society. We talked about aspects of Indian polity. We talked about aspects of Indian economy. You can think about technology, right? So what you have to do is that you understand Indian society in the light of continuity and change, or rather tradition and modernity. Yes, you can understand it as transition, because again, you just let's go back to the idea of society that we're talking about. When we said society, what we mentioned was it is not an end product; it is a process, right? So any society, for that matter, will always be in transition. Yes, Indian society, you can see that it is a mix of both. There are few modern values that are prevalent, and then there are traditional systems which still exist. So yes, it is in transition. Yes, you can think about that idea, but you remember that when we talk about society, anyways, it is always in transition. Now, to explain again how to break down an institution that will come to with respect to caste system, you'll understand. Till now, what we have done is to understand the impact of modernization on Indian society. We look at various features of the Indian society, various dimensions of the Indian society, and we talk about this. Now, when we talk about salient features of the Indian society, we are going to discuss the caste system, or the system of stratification that is prevalent in the Indian society, because it is not just limited to caste system. It is more about stratification, a system of stratification. Why? Because we are also going to talk about the class system, not in greater detail, but as a transition from caste system. Then we'll talk about the institutions of family and marriage. And finally, another feature, which is one of the most salient features of Indian society, which is diversity in India. So rather than dealing with diversity in India separately, rather than dealing with diversity in India in a factual manner, we'll take up diversity in India as a conceptual idea. So yes, stratification will come to, do not worry about it. Stratification is something that we'll ask again. And now, when you ask that whether we have to always write in bullet points, it is not necessarily the case. It depends on the demand of the question, because there'll be a few questions which would not, particularly in ethics, you can see the theoretical questions that you find do not have a lot of scope of writing in bullet points. So it is always as per the demand of the question. So what you have to do is, the more you write, the more you understand this demand. Because more you understand the logic. That if you want to read an answer, how do you want it? If you want to read an answer to this question, how do you want it? And that demand will become clearer the more you write. Okay, so these are the salient features of Indian society that we are going to take into account. Another thing is, with respect to diversity in India, we'll talk about the concept of diversity, how diversity and unity are related in India, so on and so forth. Rather than getting into the factual details of tribes, etc., we'll talk about this from a conceptual point of view, because your scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, etc., is something that you already read in your polity lectures. So I hope that most of you who are sitting here have already gone through most of the other, at least the major subjects, and will be in a position to understand, because a lot of when we talk about society, you see that it is a multidimensional approach that we have to follow. We have to look at all the aspects. So if you haven't covered all the other subjects yet, you might face a challenge in understanding Indian society. Now, before starting with that, let's see how do we classify our society. Now, our society can be classified, or rather, Indian society can be classified on the basis of economic activities, on the basis of values that we just saw, and also on the basis of residential trends. Now, another form of classification can be on the basis of political structure or political system. But why we are going to stick to this is that we have to understand primarily from the sociological point of view. Now, just the thing is, if we talk about values, one is traditional, the other one is modern, that we have just understood. We've understood the idea of modernization. We've understood how Indian society is going under change because of the forces of modernization, and how it is resisting, how it is maintaining its continuity. Because we saw that with respect to a few features, for example, be it religion, be it languages, be it diversity, there has been a continuity with respect to our social institutions. So yes, there have been changes in the social institutions, but those social institutions remain as it is. So how Indian society maintains that continuity, and that idea you'll get when we talk about stratification and rather caste system. Then if we talk about the classification of Indian society on the basis of economic activities, we can see that if we think in terms of transition, when you look at the society long ago, maybe before ancient times, before the civilization, quote unquote, civilization started, we can see that men, or rather society, was primarily hunting and gathering. That means there's no concept of agriculture. It was mostly forested. So you'll go out, either hunt animals or gather fruits and vegetables and other things from the forest. So it was primarily a hunting gathering society. Now, we're not going to get into the social structure of these societies, because this is something that does not concern our subject right now. Then it moved on to, then man, or the society, people or groups in society learned how to produce these things on their own, how to cultivate, how to grow a crop, and it started the era of agrarian economy, and rather we shifted towards agrarian economy. So that agriculture initially it was meant for subsistence because it was meant to take care of your and your family's food security needs, and it was mostly that people were living in it was mostly tribal system, so people were living in communes. So it was not just you as an individual and your family, but your group at large, your tribal group at large. Then slowly from this industrial, from this agricultural economy, with the industrial revolution, with the invention of steam engine, etc., you find that we moved towards an industrial economy, wherein a lot of industries were set up, and slowly and steadily the contribution of agriculture as a major economic activity reduced. Then finally, if you look today, we have moved towards a post-industrial society. Now, if you understand this, you see that in the industrial era, it is the push towards industrialization, it is the push towards manufacturing. But now, if you see, it is more towards service sector. We see that in most of the countries across the globe, you find that major contribution to the GDP comes from the service industry. And you see that there are various differences between industrial and post-industrial society in the sense that a few values are changing, our demography is changing, because it is not just economic activities that are changing. They bring in changes in all other dimensions of life. So not just our, say, if we talk about industrial and post-industrial societies, then one relies on industries, the other one relies on service sector. Then if you look at the institution of family, because even when it was industrial economy, a lot of people, most of the people were still engaged in agriculture. And even today, if you see, most of the people in India are engaged in agriculture, in agricultural activities. So we are, in that sense, primarily agrarian. But if you see that in the industrial era, there were still the social institutions that were prevalent in older days. For instance, the institution of family. So it does not. So yes, we started having nuclear families in the industrial era, but it has increased in the number, in the pace, in the frequency in the post-industrial era. So yes, you can highlight a few differences from industrial and post-industrial societies. Then if we talk about based on residential trend, you'll find you can think about this in terms of distribution of population. So population is just distributed in rural and urban areas. Also, we have tribal societies or people living in tribes. So this has more to do with residential trend or the distribution of population. Now these are the aspects. These are these aspects which will be covered through the course of our social issue syllabus. So you need not worry that there might be a few things that you would not have been able to understand completely, but everything will fall in place by the time we finish these lectures. Now, these societies you can talk about the various features of these different types of societies. Now, if we talk about rural society, let's take for example rural society. We talk about rural society. First thing is talk about the economic activity, because how do you break it down? You talk about the major economic activity. You talk about your political dimension, how the political structures differ in rural and urban areas. Then you talk about the social and cultural factors, and you can bring about you can think about the changes, the role of technology, how the environment is. All those aspects can be covered. So if we talk about say political system, you see that we have different political setups in rural and urban areas. If we talk about major economic activity in agrarian, in rural areas, it is agriculture. In urban areas, it can be industrial or service. Then if we talk about say social dimension of it, so we talk about various features of these societies. Talk about the institution of family in rural areas. Talk about the institution of family in urban areas. Then the institution of marriage. Then the institution of caste, and that's how you break it down. And with respect to culture, you can talk about the cultural diversity. You can talk about the intermingling of culture, etc. So these are the things that again will become more and more clear as we proceed. Because once we're done with the dissection of caste system, as I call it, you'll be able to understand that how to break things down and look at the impact and various other aspects. So for now, you can just understand it simply, and we'll get into all these aspects in detail later. So similarly, if you talk about tribal society, you can think about various features of tribal society, the value system, the social makeup, the institution of marriage, the institution of family, etc. So these are a few ideas that you can think about. And what you have to do is while revising, because I don't want your revision to be a very dull and boring practice. Rather, it has to be a little interesting, that you have something new to learn as well during your revision. So what you can do is you can try these exercises, because these are that's how they have been given in form of exercises. You can try doing it yourself. And anyways, they'll be covered by the time we finish the syllabus. So with respect to salient features of Indian society, as already mentioned, we are going to talk about caste system first. Then we'll move on to the institution of family and marriage, and finally we'll talk about diversity in India. So till now, what we have discussed is we have looked at the concept of society. What is society? What is the idea of social change? How society interacts with individual. That individual makes changes in the society. Society brings about changes in the individual. Then we talked about the idea of socialization. Then we moved, or rather drifted, towards Indian society. But before that, we covered what is the idea of modernization. Then we looked at our Indian system or Indian society in the light of the forces of modernity. And we talked a little about how the Indian system or how the Indian society maintains the continuity even with modernization. Then we understood various classifications that can be thought of with respect to Indian society. Now what we'll do is we'll take up these salient features one by one and discuss these. But before we start with this part, let's take a small break. Let's take a break that is mandated, and we will be back in 15 minutes and resume by 7:58. And thereon we'll start our discussion on caste system. So let's take a 15-minute break. Okay. And Nitish, your question will be addressed. Do not worry about it. we say that when we welcome back. Let's start again. So the first salient feature of Indian society that we are going to take up is caste system. Now, before caste system, we say that when we were talking about salient features of Indian society, I mentioned that this idea of social stratification is something that is also changing. So the way we stratified our society in the past is different from the way we stratify our society presently. There has been changes. There have been changes. So what is this idea of social stratification? The arrangement of groups of individuals in hierarchical positions based on criteria like wealth, prestige, etc. What does that mean? Let's look at our caste system. Most of you must be aware how the caste system looks. Now, caste system is the hierarchical arrangement of groups of individuals on the basis of their caste. That is, on the basis or on the idea behind it is that of purity and pollution. So what does caste system do? It stratifies groups of people. It keeps Brahmins on the top, then Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and at the bottom, Shudras. On the basis of what? On the basis of practices associated with their particular caste. Now, this is one example of social stratification. Another example can be a society stratified on the basis of class. Now, class, just think in these terms, class has more to do with wealth, occupation, etc. That we're going to discuss in the future. But right now, understand simply as on the basis of your occupation, on the basis of your wealth, the society is stratified. How it can be? You can have the business and political classes who are ultra rich at the top. You will have the upper middle classes below them. Then you'll have lower middle class. And finally, you'll have lower class, wherein you'll have people, like if you talk about the bottom of the hierarchy, you'll have people who barely make any money to make the ends meet. The ones you can consider below poverty line. Then post that, you have people who barely cross the poverty line. And then you can keep moving to the top. So what is it? This is stratification of the society, arrangement, hierarchical arrangement of groups on the basis of wealth. Then it can be on the basis of prestige. Because there'll be certain occupations to which people accord more prestige. They feel that they are better professions. So similarly, what is caste system? Caste system is arrangement, hierarchical arrangement of groups on the basis of caste. Now, before we get into the finer details of it, I would like to tell you something, that there is one system called Varna system. Then you have caste system. So there are differences between these. There has been transition from Varna towards caste system, and that will be discussed later. But right, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to understand the caste system as it has been prevalent in the traditional Indian society. So we're not going all the way back to the Varna system that you talk about during your Vedic era. We're talking about the caste system that has been prevalent since then. When we talk about caste system, it is an arrangement of division of labor, inequality, and hierarchy. These are just three features, but let's try to understand these. If we talk about division of labor, we see that to each caste there was a restricted occupation, restricted and definitive occupation. So Brahmin is supposed to perform the duties that are according to that caste. A Kshatriya is supposed to perform the duties that belong to his caste, and these are restricted as well. They cannot, a Kshatriya cannot go on and take up responsibility of a Brahmin, and vice versa. So these occupations were restricted. One that will come to, but you have to understand that there is a certain division of labor. That this group of the society will take care of this task. The way we have specialized skills today, the way we have, on the basis of these skills, we have division of labor across organizations. Similarly, you find this division of labor in the traditional Indian system as well. So the Kshatriyas will take care of the security aspect, Brahmins will take care of the religious and the educational aspects. Then Vaishyas are supposed to take care of business, and finally, the Shudras will take care of all the other services. They'll be basically service providers to the society. This is division of labor. If we talk about inequality in the sense that every caste had certain disabilities, and the caste on the top of the hierarchy had certain advantages as well. So the treatment of all these castes was not equal, as we'll see. Then in arrangement of hierarchy, we see that on the basis of the caste, people were arranged in this hierarchy, this fourfold caste system. Now also the way caste system has evolved from Varna system, etc., will be discussed in the future. So do not worry about those aspects. So right now, just understand basically what caste system meant. Now with each caste, with each of this social group, there was attached a set of norms, values, and sanctions. Those norms can be, for instance, endogamy. That one is supposed to marry inside the same caste. They're not supposed to marry outside the caste. Then there were disabilities as well, sanctions as well. That a Brahmin is not supposed to eat non-vegetarian food. A Brahmin is not supposed to say indulge in any kind of alcoholism, etc. Then there were disabilities on the people from the lower caste, say on temple entry restrictions, etc. Now again, what I say is that when you understand caste system, Varna system, after the features, we are going to talk about the transition, how things have changed, what were the untouchables, because that's something we have not mentioned here. So we'll come to all that. But before that, let's talk about various features of the caste system. And I hope now your question about social stratification has been answered. So social stratification does not necessarily mean that you have to look at the traditional Indian society in terms of caste. It was the major major aspect or major way in which society was stratified. And we see that across the globe, we have different systems of stratification. And in India as well, it has been evolving. And the question whether there was nepotism in caste, yes, it is always there, because once it is restricted by birth, it is bound to be there. Now let's look at the various features of caste system, and you have to be a little careful by talking about these features, because ultimately these are the features basis which will look at the changing nature of caste system. Whether caste system remains the same or whether there are changes in the caste system. The first feature is segmental division of society. Now, society on the basis of the occupation according to them, on the basis of caste, was divided in various segments. Kshatriyas, Brahmins, Vaishyas, that we have already shown. So it is basically a segmental division of the society. So one is segmental division, another one is placing them in a hierarchy. Then the idea behind this was that of purity and pollution. Now, if we talk about purity and pollution, it is with respect to religion. So on the basis of religious rituals, castes were arranged in this hierarchy. Now, how did it come into being, etc., will be addressed with Varna system. Then, if we talk about hierarchy, this arrangement of people from bottom to, you can look at from bottom to top or from top to bottom, is the hierarchy that we're talking about, which is one of the features of caste system. Then the membership was restricted by birth and hereditary. What does that mean? That means if you're born to a Brahmin family, you remain a Brahmin for life. The membership of that social group comes with birth, comes with the family in which you were born. So the membership is restricted by birth, and I hope that question answers your question of nepotism. And then it is hereditary. Why? Because it passes on from generation to generation. Your grandfather was born in one caste, then your father was born in the same caste, then you were born in the same caste, so on and so forth. So it goes on passing from one generation to other. The way we pass on or way we transfer our movable, immovable property down the line or through generations, in the same way, this identity of caste was passed on as a hereditary thing. Then segmental division of society, again, you can just think about dividing the society on the basis of caste into Kshatriyas, Brahmins, Vaishyas, Shudras. What is this? Segmental division. What was the basis? Basis was labor. What kind of occupation they're doing on the basis of purity and pollution, right? The restricted and definitive occupation. Every caste was supposed to perform had certain roles and responsibilities, and they were supposed to follow the same. They could not have gone against the caste system or the norms that restrict them to a particular occupation, and they had to keep following the same practice. Just think about it. Because someone had asked a question in the past that whether the caste system is bad or not. So by the time we finish our discussion on caste system, you'll get your answer. So think about this: that if you're born to a Vaishya family, you're supposed to take care of business aspects. You cannot have the mobility. You cannot go on and take up, say, work that is being performed by a Kshatriya, for instance. So this division of labor that we are talking about is restrictive and definitive. That your caste will decide what kind of labor that you will perform, and you have to stick to the same. Also, if we talk about the institution of marriage, there was endogamy. Now, endogamy means marrying in one's own caste. That if you're born to a particular caste, you cannot marry someone outside that caste. There's no concept of intercaste marriages. And if at all it happens, there were norms that were decided by the particular caste. And mostly people who went ahead with intercaste marriages were outcasted, were not considered a part of that group anymore. Then there were restrictions on food, drinking, and social behavior. You can think in terms of you're not, say, a Brahmin is not supposed to eat non-vegetarian food. Then also, in this, different castes were not supposed to intermingle. Different castes were not supposed to share food from the same place. They're not supposed to eat together. So these kind of restrictions on food and drinking were there. Then there were certain privileges and disabilities. That, for instance, there were kings who asked Brahmins not to pay any taxes. So Brahmins had this privilege of not paying any taxes. For instance, is what a privilege, because a privilege is something that one of the say one section of the society has and the other doesn't have. Because these are not rights. These are not rights to say no tax. That's what a privilege. Why? Because it is not available to other sections of the society. Because rights are something that are available equally to all the sections of the society. Then there were disabilities. For instance, you can think about untouchables. You can think about person from specific castes who were not allowed to go out in public during sunrise and sunset. Why? Because of this idea of purity and pollution, it was believed that even the shadow of a person from that caste would pollute someone from the upper caste. And when you use these terms, upper and lower caste, you always remember to use so-called with it, because it is not something that you believe in, it is something that was prevalent. So the so-called upper caste would get polluted even with the shadow. And you know that during the sunrise and sunset, a person would form the biggest shadow. So they're not supposed to come out at that point of time. And they were not supposed to use the public wells. They're not supposed to be in public places. There were restrictions on education. So these were what? These were different disabilities that came with each and every caste. Now every caste had their own distinct style of life. They had their own culture. They had their own rituals. So for instance, we talk about the wearing of sacred thread. That sacred thread, which is worn by the so-called upper caste, Brahmins and Kshatriyas. Again, it was a ritual that was distinct to their social group. That they had their own conflict resolving mechanisms, and that these are still private that I'll come to. We can talk about the caste councils. So these caste councils are the ones who will make the norms, who will set the norms of behavior of that for that particular caste, and they are the ones who will punish someone or reward someone on the basis of whether they follow those norms or not. So, for instance, if someone goes against the idea of endogamy, someone goes out and marries someone from the other caste, you'll find that they'll be outcasted. And these decisions were taken by these caste councils or Kha panchayats. And you see that these Kha panchayats are still available in a few rural areas in India till today. Now, then there were local and regional differences. It means the first thing that you have to understand is when we talk about caste system, it is not just this fourfold hierarchy. The fourfold hierarchy that we're talking about, that is of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. It is not just that. When you look at the caste system, you'll find that within these groups, you had various subcastes. And not had, you still have. And you can say that today, close to 4,000 castes are there. Endogamy is marrying in one's own caste, not marrying outside the caste. So the boy and the girl who are getting married have to belong to the same caste. Then, so we say that we had more than we have till today more than 4,000 castes in the country, which are basically the subsets of or subcastes inside this fourfold hierarchy. Now what happens is, so the ones so there will be when you have multiple subclasses, so what happens is, if you go from one region to other on the basis of prestige, on the basis of their wealth, because what happens is your wealth also decides how your caste or how the social group is treated. So on the basis of prestige, on the basis of wealth, you would find that if you go from one region to another across the country, that these subcastes, so the main, this hierarchy remains the same, it does not change, but the subcastes inside it go on changing. So if you move from say Uttar Pradesh to Haryana, you'll find that the hierarchy among these subcastes is different. Also, if you look at say the not just the position in the hierarchy, if you also look at various differences with respect to their rituals, you find there is a difference. When you talk about caste system, you have to think about in terms of how it evolved over a period of time. Because if you see that you have you had Varna system in the past, which was slightly different. That is something that will come to next. And caste system, which has close to 4,000 castes, and there is a strict division of labor. Every caste is supposed to perform their own duty, their own responsibility. They're not supposed to take up any other occupation. Now, if you look at these features, the features of disability, the features of privileges to a certain caste, the feature of restricted occupation, the feature of endogamy, and you'll find that yes, you can say that it was rather had a lot of negative features. So the caste system had a lot of negative features. But the thing is that every society has one way or the other to stratify the various social groups, to stratify the society. But if you compare it with other systems of stratification, that of the slaves and the serfs, etc., you'll find yes, there are negative ideas related to it, but you'll still find that the division of labor, that is again desirable today as well, because in your office, in your workplace, you'll find that everyone is performing their definite task, their definite work. They don't have say developer doesn't go on creating content on the website, for instance, right? So there is division of labor, which is desirable. But when you say that it is accorded by birth, that your birth in a particular family will decide that what occupation you have to take up in future, this becomes a problem. When your birth or your caste decides that you cannot go for education, that you cannot go and meet, or cannot go out in public, these are the problems which are associated with caste, and I hope it answers your question. So one of the positive aspects that you can look into is division of labor, but once you add other aspects of disabilities, privileges, restrictive occupation, etc., it becomes a negative idea. Now, when we talk about Varna system, if we see in the Vedic era, we had the stratification of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Again, it was on the basis of your work. There was also division of labor. But the difference is, in the Varna system, the difference is that on the basis of your occupation, your Varna will be decided. In caste system, what are we saying? In caste system, on the basis of occupation, on the basis of your caste, your occupation will be decided. This is the occupation that you have to take up. But when it comes to the Varna system, it is on the basis of your occupation that your Varna is decided. So there is a difference. So say you're born to a Brahmin family, but to take up the roles and responsibilities of a Vaishya, you engage in business. So your Varna accordingly will change. So there is social mobility. It is not rigid. But if you talk about caste system, if you're born to a Brahmin family, you remain a Brahmin for life, you have to engage in the same work for life. So it is rigid in that sense. And then if you look at evolution of Varna system, now initially if you look at Varna system, it is a wonderful system of stratification on the basis of division of labor. Then you see that with time, it started getting rigid, the Varna system, because of the prestige, the idea of prestige and wealth associated with a few professions, with a few social classes. Also, this idea of untouchables outside the Varna system, they were not even considered the part of this system. They're not even considered part of the social hierarchy. Also came up. And with time, you see that this rigidity in Varna system led to membership by birth as well. Because initially the membership is on the basis of occupation, but later it transformed into membership on the basis of birth, as you find in caste system. So it is also said that the Varna system has evolved into the caste system that we see today. Now, if you talk about caste system, it is basically a system of division of labor. Now, Varna system, according to various theories, it is on the basis of color. So different colors are accorded to different Varnas on the basis of their say physical features. But if you see primarily, it is on the basis of what occupation that you take up. Now, these Varnas are 4 in number, which have uniform hierarchy across the country. So there are only 4 number: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and they have the same uniform hierarchy across the country, no matter where you go. But when you talk about caste system, it is not uniform. As we've already discussed, there are say regional differences, and also there are somewhere around 4,000 castes, and the numbers will vary. If you talk about caste, if you search various different data, the numbers will vary, because there's no way to figure out, because it's so vast a system that even your census cannot contain the exact data or exact idea about the number of castes, etc. Because somewhere the castes and the subcastes have merged, etc. Why? Because the system is evolving. The caste system, the features of caste system that we were talking about are the ones that are basic features. Now everything is under transition, as we have already discussed. So the caste system is also undergoing changes for that matter. Now, I hope you understand the difference between Varna and the caste system. So in ancient Indian society, Varna system was the basis of stratification. Then it moved towards caste system. And today, if we see that this caste system is evolving into class system. And also here, what you have to see is that when we talk about Varna system, it also underwent changes. And in your ancient history lectures, you read that during the later Vedic era, you find that the system of Varna started becoming rigid. It became the membership came with birth, for instance. So these changes were going on. Also, if you see in caste systems, you just remember one more aspect, that is, we're saying that it is not rigid. The membership is not by birth. It's not rigid in the sense that there is social mobility. Now, remember this idea that we'll discuss next. Also, because if I make a statement that from modern society, we are moving towards ancient society. We are moving toward tradition as well. Because the way we say that the Varna system gave way to the caste system as the major system of stratification. And similarly, we say in the modern world, the caste system is giving way to the class system as a system of stratification. What if I make the statement that the class system is basically moving towards the Varna system? So we were following the Varna system. This is society was stratified on the basis of Varna system. It moved towards caste. Now the caste is moving towards class. And what I'm saying is that the class system and the Varna system also find similarities. You'll find similarities there. Now, before we come to continuity and change, let's talk about this class system. Now, the caste system we have already seen that it is hereditary, there is endogamy, there is no mobility. There is no mobility in the sense that you get ascribed your identity of caste by birth and you cannot change it. So you cannot say move from bottom of the hierarchy to the top of hierarchy for that matter. Then again, it is based on ritual criteria, as we have already discussed, that because it is coming from religion. And that's why we find that ritual criteria finds importance. Rituals of wearing thread, etc. are the ones, and again, the idea of purity and pollution. Now, when we talk about class system, if you see class system can be talked about in terms of secular criteria first. Now, what secular criteria? Your level of education, your level of income, level of wealth, etc. Because just think about this. The majority of the times, you'll find that people marry with the same kind of economic level of the other family. Generally, the marriages happen on the same economic level. You will not generally find that a person from, say, a very poor family getting married into a very rich family. You generally find that marriage is happening on the same level. Similarly, if you look at your friends, particularly your friends from work today, you'll find, because not necessarily everyone's say working, but you'll find that there's more or less everyone is at the same level in terms of their wealth, in terms of their family income, etc. So this class system is again a system of stratification that is based on secular criteria. Secular criteria because you will generally say hang out with your friends who have again similar educational background. So these are basic criteria on which the class system is based. But the class system, you'll find that again there is endogamy as well. Why? Because again the first example that I've given is with respect to marriage, and then also you'll find that there is at least no restriction on exogamy. Exogamy marrying outside one's own class. They mean different when we talk about marriage. There will give you a clear picture, but here it means endogamy marrying inside one's own class and exogamy marrying outside one's class. But at least there is no restriction on marrying outside one's own class, because in context of caste system we see that one was bound to marry inside their own caste. But here, a doctor can marry a teacher can marry a businessman. So this is how you find that exogamy is permitted. But you'll still find that generally people end up marrying in their own class. So which brings about a few similarities with the caste system. Then again, it is not hereditary because you can be born to poor parents and establish a wonderful, great business in the future. So it is not hereditary. Another thing is you are not bound to carry on the say occupation that your parents did. So it is not hereditary in that sense as well. So class, so for instance, your father might be a teacher and you want to become a civil servant. Right? So it is not hereditary in that sense. Also, there is social mobility because you can move from one class to another on the basis of your education, on the level of your expertise. You can move from one class to another. But here you have to remember one thing. Before we come to mobility, you have to remember one thing, that this mobility, this social mobility, basically which refers to the process by which individuals or group move from one social status to another. So born in a poor family, getting rich later in life. Born into a rich family, or born into a business family, becoming a civil servant, changes the class. Now this mobility, this idea of mobility and this idea of class, always remember that generally the mobility is restricted here as well, because there is a limit. There is a limit to mobility that you'll find today as well. Because if you belong to a certain class, just think about someone from a relatively say deprived or a poorer background. Think about them. Can they afford education? Not really. Can they afford good healthcare? Not exactly. And you'll find that person from one class, person say belonging to one class, they generally stay in the same class. Yes, there is mobility, but the scope is very less. But the idea is that at least there is no restriction on the same. Because when we talk about the caste system, it was so rigid that there was restriction on mobility. Your skill sets, your say ideas, your rights do not matter there. But in the context of class system, it does. Now this idea of moving from one social class to another is similar in terms of Varna system, because that is the similarity you'll find. Within the first, in the Varna system, you had this social mobility. You could have changed your occupation, and on the basis of that, you could have moved to another Varna. You could have gone to a Shudra family, but taken up work of a Brahmin, and would have turned into a Brahmin. So you could have changed your Varna. So there was social mobility. Similarly, in caste system as well, you have this social mobility. And the caste system, that is a traditional caste system that we're talking about, is the one which restricts mobility. So yes, you can see there is a certain sense of similarity between the class system and the Varna system. So I hope this is clear. Yes, the caste system has genesis from Varna and the class system from capitalism. But again, remember that with your caste came your class as well. Because if you're coming from a particular caste, you're bound to take up that occupation. That means there's a restriction on changing your class as well. And also, there are theories which say that the caste system has not necessarily evolved from the Varna system. So rather than going into those, we can understand it simply as a transition from Varna system with increasing rigidity in Varna system, moving towards the caste system, and finally towards the class system. Because today as well, if we see, like we say that the caste system is declining and the class system is taking its place, at least in the urban areas in the country. Similarly, you find that in the past, with your caste, your class was attached. Class was not different. So the major system of stratification was caste system, but the class came along with it. So I hope your idea is clear. Now let's talk about the changes that have happened in the caste system that have been brought about by the forces of modernization. So if you want to look at the changes in caste system, what we have to do is we have to take up a few features, the important features, the core features. You have to see that these are the basic features of caste system. And if you want to figure out what changes have been brought about in the caste system, we can just look at these features and try to figure out, because that is the easiest way for that matter. Because otherwise, we can just think about the changes in caste system that might have happened. again, our understanding of that would be limited, because if you're coming from a particular region, because it happens so that in because as you know that we have a lot of castes in the country, and in another lecture someone asked that, okay, I belong to this particular caste, where does it stand in the hierarchy? And I had no idea that it was the first time that I had heard the name of that caste. So obviously we do not have a complete understanding of what is happening, how many castes are there. We don't know how is the hierarchy, because you'll find that there are various castes in the South India that do not have any presence in the north. Yes, you can find equivalents. You can find equivalents of those castes, but they're not exactly the same. So you can find, say, agricultural castes there in the south and north as well, but the castes are different. The occupation might be same, but the castes are different. Okay, so getting back to our continuity and change. So if we talk about caste system, whether it is strengthening or is it withering away with time. So we are going to look at caste system in the light of change. So the features that we have here, let's look at them one by one. So let's talk about segmental division of society. We talk about segmental division of society into various castes. Is it still prevalent or not? What do you think? Has this idea of segmental division of society changed or not? No, it hasn't. Absolutely yes. It hasn't changed. Why? Because the society is still divided into these segments. Not somewhat, because see, you're still accorded a caste by birth, and you'll rarely find examples of people, say, uh, not following the segmental division, because ultimately if you're born to a family, that family has a particular caste, and that identity automatically gets ascribed to you. Then if we talk about hierarchy, whether there is a change in this hierarchy because of modernization, or whether there has been a change in this hierarchy in the present times, if we talk about this hierarchy of castes, whether there has been change or not. You are saying no. Some of you are saying yes, there have been changes. Okay, let's think about this. So if we talk about hierarchy, now you see, take example of Green Revolution. Take example of Green Revolution. I think that would be easier to understand. So if you take example of Green Revolution, it has impacted various regions differently. Now if we talk particularly about Haryana and Punjab, it has worked wonders in terms of in terms of economic development. Yes, there have been disparities between various segments, etc. There have been environmental problems associated, but think in terms of wealth generation by a few sections of the society. So see that the agrarian castes that were there, who were barely able to make their ends meet, who were involved in agriculture for subsistence, for taking care of their familial food security needs, and with Green Revolution, they amassed a lot of wealth. Now, with that wealth, don't you think in the society that they belong, their position or their status would have changed? So the hierarchy that we're talking about, yes, it has changed to a certain extent, and you can take similar examples from urban India as well. So with new economic opportunities coming up, the hierarchy has changed. But you would see the change has not been, say, very widespread, because you can still find, if not in urban areas but in rural areas, you still find a person can become a great businessman. If they stay in that society, they have to follow the norms of the society, and the hierarchy does not change. Generally in rural areas. So the hierarchy, yes, you can have a mixed response. And I hope you are able to write these examples. So hierarchy, I just write Green Revolution, and with that you can relate to it. And again, in that sense, you can see that how caste and class go hand in hand. Then we talk about membership by birth, whether membership by birth has changed or not. Someone saying yes. You see that the family that you're born in, you get ascribed the same caste identity. So the feature of caste system, which talks about membership by birth, has not changed. Then again, if you move on to restricted and definitive occupation, what do you think, it has changed or not? Then someone is asking about hierarchy. Now the hierarchy, yes, in terms of class, someone with the help of Green Revolution, someone has evolved. Yes, at times the social hierarchy also changes. You see that the ones who have amassed wealth, they do not have the same social status in the society as before. They have somewhat better status than that. But yes, their caste identity remains the same. So that was the idea of hierarchy. Now we talk about restricted and definitive occupation. Now see, the thing is, yes, it has changed, because one idea is, take that idea from your Indian constitution, that is that everyone has the right to get involved in any kind of occupation that you want, unless until you are eligible for the same. Because you cannot say that I want to become a civil servant without going through the examination. So you have to be eligible. But yes, everyone is free to take up any occupation that they want. So the idea of restricted and definitive occupation has changed. Now, everyone is free to choose their occupation. It is not based on caste. But again, you'll find exceptions as well. You will see that, say, take instance of a porter. So if they say are born in the same family, generally what happens is, because they do not have avenues for formal education, and the children get involved in the same activity. So you'll find that yes, there is no restriction on occupation, but again, the classes are not is that you'll find that generally in the bottommost section of the class hierarchy, you'll find that people are still involved in the same occupation. Also, another thing is, another idea that you can take on is, okay, someone is talking about manual scavenging. Yes, then you can take about one occupation. You take example of one occupation that is from the top, where you find that there is restricted occupation. Yes, exactly. The priests, the position of priest or the responsibility of priest is generally taken up by Brahmins. So you have multiple examples wherein you can say that yes, we still have restricted occupation, but these are exceptions. The idea is that with constitution, everyone is free to take occupation of their choice, and with exceptions, say, you can talk about Brahmins. Then if we talk about endogamy, yeah. So here also we find mixed responses, because this is what it is, right? So we see that the caste norm of endogamy is still prevalent, and people generally do not marry outside their caste. People still go for endogamy. But you see that it is increasingly being challenged, at least in the urban areas. The idea of endogamy is increasingly being challenged in the urban areas. And how do you find continuity? How do you say continuity? You can still find that the matches that one looks for marriage are generally restricted with their caste. Then restrictions on food, drinking, and social behavior, you can say that it has absolutely changed. There are no restrictions on anyone for that matter. There are no privileges or disabilities on anyone for that matter. But you still find that these privileges and these disabilities still exist. The practice of endogamy still exists. People still follow the caste norms, but increasingly they are being challenged. So we cannot completely say that the caste system has changed, and also we cannot say that the caste system has remained the same over the years. So there have been changes. Plus, we have talked about various exceptions to various features as well. Now, these factors of change, you can talk about modernization, which have brought about these changes, etc. On the basis of this, we'll also look into questions, etc. But please tell me if everything. Just give a quick thumbs up if everything till here is fine. If you're able to understand everything, perfect. Okay, someone is not able to understand about mobility. Okay, a lot of you. So if we talk about social mobility in class means you can change your occupation, you can change your class if you want. But when it comes to caste system, we say that there's no mobility. It is rigid in the sense that you cannot change your caste. You cannot change the occupation related to your caste. But again, when I say this, I'm talking about this in terms of traditional caste system. Now, if we talk about various factors for change and various factors for continuity, what are these factors responsible for continuity of caste system till today? Even though we say that there are changes that are happening in the caste system, and we have looked into a few of them, but why? What are the factors because of which it maintains its continuity? Now, one thing is, now when we talk about this continuity, it is not just about the continuity of caste as a system. It is also about the continuity of caste system as a sense of identity in people. Okay, so it has to be looked at in two ways. It's not just about the various features and the restrictions, etc., related to the caste system. It is also about the mindset. It is also about the identity of caste that people are still following. So the factors can be one. You can talk about reservation. That is the method of positive discrimination provided in the constitution. You can say that this is one factor which is responsible for its continuity, because this is one factor which gives people a sense of identity, that I belong to this caste. And basis that, you have seen that there has been conflicts at times, because that is another way of manifesting your caste identity. But you see that because of this reservation, the caste identity is enforced. Then similarly, we talk about various pressure groups taking up the demands of various downtrodden sections of the society, various castes from the so-called lower section of the society. At times, you'll find pressure groups of the so-called upper caste of the society talking about or demanding reservation. You can take example of that. So these various pressure groups also strengthen the caste identity. Then if we talk about caste-based politics, you have examples from various political parties. We take example of BSP, for instance. So we find that this politics based on caste is also a factor which is responsible for maintaining this continuity, because these political parties, in the name of caste, turn the social groups into vote banks. They go for politics of appeasement, and that is the reason you find that because of this caste-based politics, the caste identity is enforced. Then the idea of casteism. Now, casteism you can understand as different from caste politics. Casteism is that feeling of belonging to the same caste, or the feeling of identifying yourself to the same caste and having and favoring someone from the same caste. Because the way we proceed in say communalism, say if we talk about communalism, we say the first stage is identifying yourself with one particular social group, then having a feeling that our interests are same. Similarly, when it comes to casteism, first identifying yourself as a member of a particular caste or a social group, then feeling that it is my duty to take care of other members of my social group or my caste, and that is the feeling of casteism, and which is manifested in the form of people favoring others on the in the name of caste. So you go for an interview. There are two people and they belong to the same caste, the interviewer and the other person belong to the same caste, and on the basis of caste rather than on the basis of your expertise, they select the other candidate. What is that? A manifestation of casteism. So this idea of casteism, this idea of identifying yourself with your caste, is one reason. Also, something that is not mentioned here, you can again relate these to socialization as well. Now the thing is, you do not have to look at these factors in isolation. Okay, remember, you do not have to look at these factors in isolation, because think about reservation. So first the person is able to identify themselves with a particular caste, then there'll be a pressure group who would say that, okay, why not demand reservation for your caste, for our caste? It might turn into a political movement, then there'll be a political party which will come and say that if you vote us, we'll give you a reservation. So these are not mutually exclusive. Every factor will have impact on each other, and that is what I meant when initially I was saying that you have to look at various dimensions and the exchanges between these dimensions. Then we talk about our primary socialization, which happens in the family, wherein they teach us language, wherein they teach us various norms, various conduct. There as well, there we get this idea of caste as well. You belong to this particular caste. So this socialization also reinforces your caste identity, and this socialization need not be only from family, but also maybe later in your life, maybe once you grow up, because of the society that you stay in, you get this caste identity reinforced. And the simple example is that you'll find another reason for prevalence of caste system in rural areas is that they have a very strong sense of identity with respect to their caste. Because why? Because that is a socialization that happens on all levels of the society. So your parents, your family, the other social groups that you interact with, everyone reinforces that caste identity. And similarly, in urban areas, because of nuclear families, because of social isolation, you do not get that sense of caste identity as such. It is not always the case, but yes, more often than not. So I hope you get that idea. Now, the caste councils that we were talking about in the past, that there were caste councils who govern every aspect of a particular caste, they're still prevalent, particularly in Haryana, Western UP. You still have these caste councils, and the prevalence of these caste councils, again, add to the factors that are responsible for continuity of the caste system. So someone has asked a question that a division of labor is advantageous in caste system in the sense that it leads to specialization of work. Then the very origin of caste system was this only. Okay, see, the origin of caste system, yes, if you relate it with Varna system, yes, it was the same. You can think about in terms of your, say, occupation. At times it is attributed to color, but yes, mostly it is understood as your with respect to your occupation, the Varna classification, which got rigid over a period of time. The thing is, because if you look at this thing, then you find that every process, every social institution changes over a period of time. Now those changes can be positive or negative, and we see that the Varna system that gave way to the caste system, the Varna system that became rigid, gave way to the caste system. Now this caste system is giving way to a more flexible class system as well. So this is the process, because even in class system you again have division of labor for that matter, but again it's not restricted. And again, the thing is, another idea is, if you look at it from an even open mind, if you look at it from even open mind, you'll find that if you talk about, say, we talk about division of labor or specialization of work, what do you think the specialization makes us more mechanical compared to organic? Because organically you might not want to work on the same thing for your entire life, because yes, there are people who find a common passion and profession because they are in a profession which they actually are very passionate about. They can go on doing that for life and for maybe after life as well. But most of the people, if you see, are there in profession to take care of their economic and social security needs. So then there is a possibility. There is a possibility that they might not feel the same for their profession. And the more we have been specialized, and a few of the students of sociology might be able to understand here that when we talk about alienation, that this specialization of work is one factor for that. And we'll come to that, do not worry, rather than using these, say, sociological terms, we'll explain it simply when the time comes. So yes, division of labor puts obligations on individuals sometimes, yes, that is it. So okay, these were the factors responsible for continuity of the caste system. Now let's look at the factors responsible for change. And again, I'm repeating the same thing. You do not think about these factors in isolation. Think about these factors, how they reinforce the other factors as well, because they're not mutually exclusive. Now let's talk about factors responsible for change. The changes in the caste system that we see. The changes in the caste system that we see, what can be the factors attributed to the same? You can think about the forces of modernization, westernization, industrialization, and urbanization now. Because with urbanization, people move from their rural areas to urban areas. Because of industrialization, urbanization happened as well. Because of which, now just think about an industry. In industry, people have to mingle. People from various castes would have to work together for that matter. If we talk about urban areas, people have moved out of rural areas. Now there is not many people would identify them. People do not know what caste, what kind of background you come from. It is only your secular identity that they're aware. Because just think about this. Most of you must be staying in urban areas. My guess is because we are having this conversation in English. So yes, the chances are that you are from urban area. So you know, if there is someone living in your apartment in the same society, you would identify them by he's a doctor or he's an engineer, he's a software engineer, he works at this firm, he works at Google, so on and so forth. So the caste identities do not matter as much as class identity. One. Second, there is a freedom in public spaces. So people would have to say sit in the trains together, travel together, and the caste identity won't matter so much. So you can connect with modernization, westernization, urbanization, etc. Now, other idea is education, which again comes with modernization. Now, with education, people become aware. People start questioning these disabilities and these privileges related to caste. So education becomes another form of, say, factor responsible for changing caste system. Then, if we talk about democratic decentralization, this can be understood in the sense that we see while moving from the traditional system, we adopted democracy. Post that, we see that we are going more towards our panchayati raj institutions, etc. Now, because of which, previously, if you see that few castes were restricted to matters of politics, and most of them did not have any say in the matter of politics. Now, if you see with universal adult franchise and the deepening of our democracy, of our democracy, which is reaching the grassroots, we see that this idea of caste or the caste divide is changing. But at the same time, this democratic decentralization can also be a factor for continuity in the caste system, because we have already talked about caste politics. Because rather than this democratic decentralization working in breaking down the caste system, it can reinforce the caste system too. Then there is this concept of sensitization, which means the idea of mobility. Now, when we were talking about mobility in caste system and whether it or say hierarchy in caste system, whether it has been changing or not. So we said yes, it has been changing, but we related it to class first. We related it to, say, the ideas of green revolution and economic betterment of people. But now, if you look at this process called sensitization, which means that a person from a so-called lower caste can basically imitate the so-called upper caste, their ritual practices, and move up in the hierarchy. I repeat, this idea of sensitization, means someone from the so-called lower caste imitating the rituals of the so-called upper caste and going up in the hierarchy. This is what is the process of sensitization called. Now, why would they do that? To rise up in the hierarchy. Also, there was again a limit to the level of change that you can make in hierarchy. So it's not that because the mobility. So we can say that with time, even caste system had say the rigidity of caste system was broken down and it gave way to mobility. But you see that it was very limited and it was not a rule. It was not a general rule that sensitization would happen. But yes, people started doing that. So sensitization is another factor which is responsible for change. So a process where it's not necessarily acknowledging, it's not just acknowledging, but imitating the same. So democratic decentralization, just understand it in this term. Leave this term, just understand simply that now we have democracy in India. Now people have right to vote. One, if you look at the traditional caste system, people did not have, not all the castes had political power. There were the castes which were left behind, which had no political say whatsoever. Now everyone has a right to vote. One. Now because of this right to vote, the idea of disabilities or the restrictions on certain sections of the society is removed. That means weakening the caste system. But in other sense, you see what you see is that because of this democratic decentralization or because of this right to vote, it has given birth to the politics of vote bank as well. So it has both negative and positive impacts on the caste system. So I hope this is clear. Yes, not just right to vote, you're right in that sense that you can talk about representation as well. So everyone has a right to be a representative. Yes. Okay. So these were a few factors which were responsible for change. We looked at the caste system, features of caste system. Then we looked at how caste system transitioned from Varna to caste, and caste system today is giving way to class system. Then we looked into various factors of which are bringing about change in the caste system, and what are factors that maintain the continuity of the caste system. And we looked at various features of the caste system and what are the type of changes that are happening. Now, another thing is, this is just to give you an idea. Now, these are very old numbers, and you already know that National Family and Health Survey phase 5 is out. The data for phase 1 is out, and let's wait for other data to come. But you see that the caste system and class system that I was trying to explain, that they are intertwined. Why? Because someone historically being restricted to one occupation for generations, a social group being restricted to one occupation for generations, and if that occupation is not very good in sense of remuneration, in sense of the money that it pays, they would have that disadvantage because of this complex history, because of this history of discrimination. And then you find that even though we say that the caste system is declining, even though we say that there is no restricted and definitive occupation today, everyone is free to work in whichever field they want, whichever occupation they want to take up, but you still see, looking at the numbers with respect to wealth, we still find the castes or the say social groups which were historically disadvantaged, they are the ones whom will be found at the bottom of the hierarchy in terms of class system or in terms of wealth as well. So the caste system and class system are related. Why? Because again, with caste came definitive occupation. Someone is saying that reservation for Dalits in Panchayati Raj institutions is still continuing with caste system. That how it has helped in change. Now that's what we mentioned, that it both reinforces the caste identity and it brings about changes as well. That's why we are looking at all the dimensions. So this idea of representation of the lower caste, of the so-called lower caste, it is against this feature of caste system which talked about disabilities. So disability from political sphere, but now they can be representatives. Another thing is, at the same time, the reservation that is provided reinforces the caste identity. So yes, the way we have discussed, because this thing has been already discussed maybe twice. So yes, I hope you'll be able to understand now. So you can think about the interplay between your caste and class. And also I've just taken this out from an article. You can just go through it once, and here you'll find that till today there isn't a lot of difference with respect to wealth and caste. So wealth and caste go hand in hand. Because generally one of the arguments against reservation is that what about the ones who have already made it to the top? But you'll find that those are exceptions. Right? So yes, we have to remember that whatever arguments we give, they should be based on facts. And again, there is no perfect way to achieve a particular goal. But yes, we have to try our best to. No, you do not have to remember any numbers. This data has been given just to give you a glimpse of it, that how caste and class, or caste and the wealth, are linked. Now look at this practice question. This is something that is expected from you, that you have to write this question and send it across, so that whatever you have understood in the class, you get a fair idea that the kind of questions that can be asked, because similar kind of questions have been asked in the past. So you have to see that these kind of questions can be asked because one, this question is directed towards social change. Another thing is, it is on caste system, which is one of the salient features of Indian society. So you have to try to write this question. Let's discuss this simply, rather than, I would not give the entire structure for this. You have to figure out on your own. Another thing is that this is something that we have already discussed in the class. So you know that it can be easily taken care of. You can write it into 50 words and 15 marks. So caste system is undergoing changes in the contemporary Indian society. As simple as that. Rather than talking about the strengthening and the weakening, or the withering away of caste system, or the caste system giving way to class system, etc., I've kept it simple and open-ended. Caste system is undergoing changes in the contemporary Indian society. Now you have to discuss what are these changes, what are the changes that are happening, what are the factors for the change as well. And also you briefly have to describe what are the factors, what are the features which still maintain the continuity of caste system. So changes and opposite. Now the question is directed more towards changes. So majority of it will take the part, because here you do not have to take a stand. Basically, we're talking about various features of the caste system and whether it is undergoing change or not. So you do not have to write it like, because someone is asking whether like half I have to write or how. You do not have to write it in the way that, okay, you mention the changes first and then you move on to say the factors of continuity. What you can do is, you can take up the features of caste system and discuss them one by one, and talk, also briefly mention in the introduction about the factors that have been responsible for bringing about this change. Also, this gives you a fair idea. Yes, continuity has to be a part of this. Now, again, other thing is, with social issues, you understand one more thing. Now, a lot of you face this difficulty of how to start and how to conclude answers. Now, few questions which are, say, based on suggestions, etc., you can conclude them with the way forward with suggestions. But then there are questions where you're not able to figure out like how to introduce and how to conclude. Now, this multi-dimensional approach can help you with this. Because in this question, the question is directed towards the changes that are happening in the caste system, happening to the caste system. But now you also know that there are factors which maintain continuity. There are features of the caste system which still remain the same and have not changed over a period of time. So, which gives you ideas for introduction and conclusion. So you can easily conclude saying, yes, there have been the features, looking at the features of the caste system, yes, and caste system is undergoing changes. Yes, class system is on the rise, but you still find factors like this, which maintain the continuity in the caste system. Also, in the introduction, you can again give an overview that, yes, both the sides are there. Yeah, see, another thing is, see, when you have a question where, because if you try to write this question in 250 words, you'll find it a little challenging. You'll find it a little challenging in the sense that you have multiple features about which you have to talk to show that, yes, caste system is undergoing changes. Now, you don't have a lot of scope to write the definition of caste system in the introduction. And another thing is, it is not always necessary to write about caste system. So yes, if you want, you can briefly say that what is caste system. Caste system is an arrangement of division of labor, hierarchy, etc. Another way of doing it is, you can stick to the question rather than going elsewhere, rather than diverting anywhere. You can stick to the question and introduce in a way that saying that, yes, there are factors. While talking, okay, I'll just tell you. This is the first question, so I'll tell you. Then later you can talk about Later you can take up questions on your own. See, now this is the question. In body, you understand that we have to take up features of the caste system and talk about them in the light of change. Right? This is simple. Body is simple because this is something that we have already done here. This is something that we have already done, so we have to do that. Now we are left with introduction and conclusion. Now we know that we have additional information about this. We can show the evaluator that yes, we have the conceptual understanding and depth that you are seeking. So in introduction, what we can do is we can talk about the factors responsible for change, because these won't find a place here in the body. Body is fixed. It'll take somewhere around 180 200 words of yours because you have that much content for describing these changes. Then in introduction, you can mention the factors which are responsible for change in the caste system, and you can conclude on the note showing the evaluator that you know that it is not that everything is changing. There are again factors which maintain the continuity in the caste system. So I hope this idea, this conceptual framework is clear. The points you already have in the slides. You can talk about the slides, and you have to be logical in the sense that because when you have content, when there are things that you can write, it's better to stick to the content of the question. Because again, another thing with the writing Bain's answers is that you barely get any time during the examination to write one question. So you have 8 to 10 minutes in which you have to conceptualize and write the answer. So how do you go about it? Because a lot of students have this issue that I'm not able to write answers within 8 to 10 minutes, so on and so forth. But I say that priority is misplaced. Because right now, while you are in the preparation phase, while you are preparing yourself for the examination, you do not have to care about how much time it takes, at least initially. What you have to do is you have to, because how the time goes down, like because one is writing speed, another thing is how you conceptualize. Because if you conceptualize things properly and you keep practicing, your speed will increase over a period of time. Your time in writing one answer will go down over a period of time. That is going to happen. So initially, when you look at questions, when you try to practice questions, take as much time as you want. But the thing is, what you have to do is you look at the question, you break it down, you conceptualize how you're going to proceed, and then start writing. Because now is the time that you can actually work on your writing skills. Because before main examination, you'll be busy writing your main test series. You'll not have a lot of time to say improvise. You'll have to go through current affairs. You'll have to link current affairs. You'll have to take up themes that are there in current affairs from which you can expect questions. You have a lot to do at that point of time. You have your optional subject as well. So what you have to do is the writing skills that need to be improved has to be taken care of now. And you have to be reasonable about it. So yes, take your time, conceptualize, because the time that you take to conceptualize these answers will go on decreasing over a period of time. So someone's asking whether we can write introduction and conclusion in paragraph. Yes, because obviously generally introduction and conclusion are in a paragraph format, but you don't have a lot of scope. It is barely 2-3 lines each. Right? In body, yes, you can go in a point-wise format as well. You can take up one feature, but you have to at least with introduction, when you talk about factors responsible for change, what you have to do with it is that you also mention that that these features that are there of caste system, we have to take them up one by one and try to answer this question. So it maintain that flow. So the introduction, then goes your body, and then from body it should kind of evolve organically. Because in introduction, if we say talk about the definition of caste system or what is caste system, that is fine, but the body does not organically flow with that, because introduction is different, then body you're writing something else, and conclusion might be something else as well. So it's better you maintain the flow. So I hope this question is clear, but please do try to write this question, because this is the time you can actually improve on your writing skills, and later you will not get this freedom for that matter. Okay, so the next institution that we have to talk about is the institution of family. When we talk about family as an institution, now we see that it has been a part and parcel of the Indian society. We as individuals make families, we live in families, and only post that other concepts come into picture. Now, if we talk about family, what is a family? Just think about your family. Your family is a socially defined relationship, because just think about marriage first. When you think about marriage, you'll find that the whole idea of having a wedding ceremony is the idea of legitimizing your wedding, is the idea of legitimizing that relationship, so that the society recognizes or legitimizes that yes, these two people have been married. So ultimately, it comes down to how society looks at you. So family is a socially defined set of relationships between at least two persons. But now again, with changing times, the definition is evolving. I'll come to that. For now, you can think about a set of relationship between at least two people, which can be related either by birth, marriage, or adoption. How? Just look at a family. You have your say if you are living in a nuclear family, you have your father and your mother who are related by marriage. Then you have you and your sibling who are related to your parents by the by the relationship of birth. And then there can be a sibling of yours who has been adopted. So these are three possible ways, three possible say permutation and combination of creating a family. Now, but you think in modern times, post-COVID at least, can't you find families where there's only one member left? There's only one individual left. Can you find people who do not marry at any point in time? They get old, the parents pass away, they say they don't have siblings. What do you call them a family? Yes, you can. But the thing is, the sociological idea of family involves at least two persons, but at least we have to keep our minds open. And again, then this idea, generally previously if you see, because again, all the concepts, definitions evolve. Previously if you see, this idea of marriage was about two people of opposite sex getting into a relationship together. But now, that idea is being challenged. So you have to keep your minds and your definitions open to accommodate those things. Now there's association of people by either marriage, blood, or adoption. Why does that happen? It has a certain function. Now in sociology, we see that every social institution, there's an idea, you can say there's a viewpoint, wherein we see that every social institution has a function. Be it the institution of marriage, be it the institution of family, be it the institution of caste. Every institution has a function in the sense that it has a certain utility. It has to take care of certain roles and responsibilities. So even when it comes to family, it is primarily understood as an institution for procreation. Procreation means giving birth, then upbringing the children, socializing the children, and also take care of the socio-economic security of this group. So it has a function, because think about a person who doesn't say who lives in isolation. Whom do they go for their emotional needs? Whom do they go to for their economic needs? And if you look at family as a unit, it is a system of wherein you share the economic resources. It can be just, unjust, equitable, unequitable, that is different, but they share the economic resources, and they have a function of taking care of each other's emotional needs as well. with it comes the function of procreation, of multiplying, because this is something that you'll understand more and more as we proceed ahead, because function of family, because the one is size of a family, another thing can be composition, and then you have function. If you understand structurally, if you understand conceptually, you can find this. So any social institution or the institution of family will have size. Then it can be a big family, small family, how many members are there. Then it can be about composition, who all are the members of the family. Then it can be about functions, what functions does family perform. So we'll look into all these aspects and then move from there, because we have to look at these things or the institution of family in the light of change. So now today we do not have time to proceed ahead, and what we'll do is we'll take it up tomorrow. Now another thing, there is one request. So rather than downloading the PPT beforehand and having a look at it before the class, I would suggest if you follow the process of the class, if you sit in the class, understand, engage, ask questions, ask good questions, and then during revision you look at the PPT. Because if you look at the PPT beforehand, you'll already have a few answers which have come because you have looked at it. They haven't come from you because you have stormed your brain. So, and there is a difference, right? So this is like something I'm telling you, and there is something that you come up with. So let's keep it open for brainstorming and not look at the PPT beforehand. Yeah, so yeah, someone is so Ilma is talking about the sociological concept or in better time. Yes, so we are not going to use any name of thinkers or anything here. Why? Because it is social issues and social justice, and we do not want to go into the domain of sociology for that matter. So I try to use the same logic, same ideas in a very simple way. That's what the idea is. So some of you who are from sociology might be able to recognize, okay, this is the idea that I have taken. But yes, it'll be good. Okay, so let's wind it up for today and meet tomorrow. And if you have any suggestions, any questions, please feel free to tell me so that those can be taken care of. Another thing is my email ID is hemant.tavar@byju's.com. So you can ask your questions as well if you have any. So okay, see you tomorrow. Thank you, and thank you for the patience today.